Um, and I'm gonna record because I didn't record for like the first 15 minutes last time, and I remembered now with like after Kina, you just said all that loveliness. Welcome to those who are watching the recording. We're just talking about the review. And Kina had this really lovely statement that I'm going to make you repeat because I also, when I first took this training, felt that that was like a little bit of an aha too.
Okay.
Do you mind if I make you repeat
No,
what you
that's
just
fine.
said?
So, what really landed for me is the difference between attachment and affiliation. I think sometimes we get that confused because we see a child that's, that's coming to you. When they see you, they run up to you and things like that. But he explained the difference between the two, and I think that was really helpful in and is helpful in recognizing that, because we need to know the difference between affiliation and attachment and what it looks like when we're trying to reunify or place in a foster home, or to see if the child is appropriately attaching to the caregiver.
Yeah. Welcome, Jessica.
Hey.
We're just, before we jumped into the review, we were just going over how did that training with Dr. Zena land for us. And so Kina was just sharing a little bit of what kind of stood out for her. Anyone else have anything that sort of landed in a way that maybe was reinforcing or new to the way that you were thinking?
I think for me, it's reinforcing and it makes perfect sense. And I don't know, like way back when, if anybody else is as old as me and remembers, like when I was having my children, like reading like the attachment parenting theories and things like that, it makes sense that, to make children feel secure and safe and that their needs are getting met.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also find it to be a little hopeful in that, because I've done a variety of trainings. I was just in one this weekend actually, and they were talking about attachment style as if it was almost like, okay, here was your one shot, and then that's all you get. But the way that Dr. Zena talks about it, and probably what you've all experienced too, is like, it's not like that. It really is about that relationship, right? Like, so this last bullet point, one attachment does not preclude another or is not identical to another, right? Like we can have a different form of relationship based on that person being able to meet our needs. And to your point, Kina, it's not just about like, I enjoy you and you make my heart smile, so I want to come and I'm drawn to you. But it's also like, when my heart is sad, are you a person that I'm still drawn to? I kind of think about it in that way a little bit too. Or if I'm scared, are you a person who, I would be able to get support from in that? So, any other thoughts about the training or reflections?
I have one more thing. Also, he mentioned about time, like it takes time for that attachment to connect with a child. And I think for a lot of our foster parents coming in, they expect a child just to be so happy, like I'm in this loving home, this person's gonna, but a child doesn't know that when they are placed in their home. And so they won't automatically just attach to you because you're providing these things. It have to be consistent and ongoing for them to actually have that appropriate attachment with you. So time is something that needs to be stressed with our foster parents coming in, and probably our older foster parents too, that it's gonna take time.
Yeah.
What I was thinking, Kina, right along those lines is that even though the last bullet says it's never too late, I just think about how, depending on the amount of trauma or the lack of attachment previously, it takes time, and it can happen, but it might be harder and longer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In some of the somatic experiencing work that I do, we often talk about the research and the experience that if those relationships weren't filled with consistency and trust, and that we're a little ooh, I'm not sure if I can be in and like kind of that attachment with you. It can take 3 to 7 years for that one relationship to be able to create that. And so if you think about what that means for time, that's an investment that we maybe don't always think about in that way, right? So yeah. Or kids where, our foster families, I just, you know, spend time with them and maybe it didn't work out in the end for them to stay with them, but then they're the person that they call when they're in trouble years later, right? Like they did create a foundation that was present, to be like, okay, you can support me if I need help. Yeah.
Sorry, I have one more thought.
Yeah.
So, but it makes me think about how this aligns with brain development
Mhm.
because, like what you said, 3 to 7 years. I've heard so many different things, like for all the like negative words that are spoken to, for each negative word spoken to a child, it takes like 21 positive to rewire that. And so and if a child's brain has been wired to not trust, because my needs aren't being met, it just takes time to rewire that, or those synapses, or the things that have formed literally that have formed in the brain, to undo that and get it rewired.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great point, Suzanne, right? It's formed in the brain and felt in the body. So that will take some time. Yeah. Um, Other folks with thoughts.
I don't remember the exact slide, but it was basically, I think the idea was that if a child is willing to attach to you, that the foster parent should also be willing to kind of, well, in general, the parent, but kind of give that back to the child as well. And so sometimes I think in foster care, especially with foster parents, there's this feeling like, oh, I'm gonna provide and I'm gonna give them food and make sure they're clothed and they're taken care of, but I can't let myself give too much. But I think for there to be healthy attachment, it has to be coming from both ways, from the child and from the caretaker. And so, um, and of course I knew that, and I think it was just kind of this idea when people say I can never get too attached to a child. You need to form that attachment. You need to allow that to happen, because if not, we're really doing a disservice to our children that come into our care. So, and one other thing is when he was talking about the amount of time that biological parents or first families may have with their children, if that's just 1 hour a month or 2 hours a month, is that really enough time? And that just kind of made me think about, lately we've been doing a lot of cases with our children going to family. Maybe it's not their parents, but a grandparent or something like that. Am I willing to take out of my time to provide kind of a space, even outside of visits, for them to, be able to create those attachments? And so we try to do that outside of our work, or even just because, like he was saying, it's really important for them to have that time. I mean, I have these kids all day and all night, basically. So
Mhm.
that's kind of what stood out to me. I want to make sure I'm making space for their families, that they have that opportunity to create those attachments.
Yeah. Thank you, Brooke. Really wise. Hmm. Yeah. And so here was some of the principles around like if we're going to have an attachment system, what are some of the things that we need to hold within context? And I think, I really like the children can recover, but it's better not to test them. Um, Kind of like, yeah, is one that when I first took it sort of stuck with me of like, okay, how do we put that into actual practice? Like, how does that actually look to think about that um, for kids? Yeah. the other one too, that if someone has to suffer, it should be the adults who can understand and cope better. I've often heard, and I don't know how others have experienced it, where it almost feels like we're sort of really looking at it from like, what does the adult need, whether the adult is the worker or the overarching system concept of adult or the parent, and where does that mix happen for the kid? Even thinking about what you just said too, Brooke, like if a young kid is only seeing their parent once a week, what are we expecting, and how could we expect them to attach and seek them out for comfort if we're not actually giving that opportunity? Yeah. Anything on these principles that stood out for you?
Um, I think the system should not inflict suffering needlessly or carelessly is something that stands out to me. Just wanting to make sure that if if I whatever I have to do to make sure I'm advocating for our children, that's what I want to do. And if I feel like some part of the system is inflicting suffering needlessly, how can I step up and speak up and try to make sure that it doesn't continue to happen, or some kind of solution or resolution, I guess, could be formed or come out of it. But I have seen where specifically I feel like our court systems have inflicted suffering needlessly. And I think in that aspect, it's extremely frustrating, especially if we've been working hard to get our kids back to their families. So I think that that's something that really stood out to me. We don't want to inflict any more suffering on our children, than has already been inflicted. And how can we be proactive and not careless in the decisions that we're making?
Mm-hmm.
I would have to agree with Brooke. That was the one that stood out because I notice it with our court systems, kind of like what Brooke was saying. At times, we have staff here at the county that will say that it feels like we're doing parent protection, not child protection, and putting parents' needs first before the children. And I think that's just a shift overall that we need to make as a county, or just maybe more nationally too, I'm sure, just to like put that child in the center of the room when we're making those decisions and what's in the best interest of the child, not always the parent's best interest. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other thoughts on this slide before we move forward? Okay, we're moving forward. As you probably have guessed, we're going to have some breakouts, right? We learn best with each other. But we're kind of a small group this morning. So I'm curious what would feel best for everyone. If we want to just go into two, so it'd be maybe like 5 folks in each, or if we want to just stay as one large group. If anyone has a calling to a preference of like, it's easier for me to talk in a smaller group or not, speak now.
I'm fine with staying in a large group.
Okay. Brooke
It
says
really
large
doesn't
group is
matter
good.
to me. Oh, sorry.
No, that's great, Ada. Okay. All right. If there's no one who is feeling the draw towards the small group, we'll just stay all of us together. Okay. So, and this might take a little bit of time to think, so you don't feel like you have to jump in right now. But what we're wanting to think about is what are some of your agency practices that lend themselves to attachment? And how do you know that it does? And so let's just take a couple of minutes. I mean, it's 9:26. Let's just take the next 4 minutes for you to think about what practices does my agency have that would kind of lend itself to looking at that choice through attachment. And how do I know that? What's kind of my facts behind it? So you might have to go, I don't know, through your little thing, I don't, like spreadsheet, whatever you have going on in your agency.
Can you repeat the question, Tate? I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem, Ada. So what, and I'll be curious for you, Ada, because I can even think of some from C2I, but what are some of the practices of my agency that align to attachment and looking at it from that lens of child development, needing, like the secure relationship, the consistency and predictability, the way that we think about transitions, right? Like kind of keeping what a child needs in the center of the choices that our agencies make. And then the second part of that is like, how do you know, which is like kind of the facts that back it up, or yeah, like the decisions of that. So. So I'll give you another 2 minutes to think about it. I'll also type it in the chat because I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Oops, in case, because I'm bumping ahead in my PowerPoint. No, in case somebody else wants to share what they've got going on. Right, like I can stop share, and then if somebody else wanted to pull up an actual document they have, then they could show what that looks like. So. All right, we'll give it another minute and then think about who feels called to be the first person. All right. Anybody have the impulse to be first and share something that your agency does that lends itself to attachment?
I will go. And I missed the training last week, so this is kind of going just based on the question alone. But we have, and within our agency, we have several staff that are trained in circle of security facilitation, and that is a service that's offered in-house to well, any family who's interested or appropriate for that service, but used largely to help support reunification. And really, I mean, Circle of Security focuses on that healthy attachment between caregiver and child. It's a program that we can offer to foster parents as well as bio parents and any kind of a combination there. We have some practitioners who prefer to do that individually with families. So go, they'll go in home and really do that intensely as opposed to doing the group model. And then of course there's several groups offered, to families who feel more comfortable in like a group setting. So that is one of the best things that I think that we've started doing over the last just couple of years.
Are folks familiar with Circle of Security? No? Okay. Julie, do you feel like you've got a good handle on it, or I can also help support to explain it? 'Cause I do it.
Yeah, I can do my best to explain it. So Circle of Security is a parenting program that really the main focus is on relationship between caregiver and child, and that's through the eyes of the child based on what does the child need, and helping a parent or caregiver, I should say, recognize what does their child need in the moment. Do they need connection to help support their emotions? Do they need support to help them explore their world around them, and do they and can they come back to that? So they talk about um uh like a secure base where they can return to or go out and explore from, and knowing that that caregiver will be supporting them in whatever their needs are, whether that's need for connection or needs for exploration. That's way oversimplified. They look at how caregivers can be weak or mean or gone. Um, and so when a caregiver is triggered, they call it shark music, but when a caregiver is uncomfortable with a need that their child has, they can become mean, weak, or gone. Is those are the words that they use. And so they just like step off. I can't support my child's needs at all. Or maybe they become irritable and mean and overly punitive, or weak. And, we've all seen those parents who can become kind of whiny or give in to their children. And so it helps parents become just reflective on what they're doing in relationship with their children and how they can better support their children. Um, and I don't know, I've just seen, in families that I've worked with, a real shift in that parents don't feel like, old parenting programs like 1, 2, 3 Magic, things like that, weren't really helpful to parents and to families. It was families would feel like, oh my gosh, I forgot one of the steps, or I can't do this. This is really, and it wasn't really helpful to the children either. Whereas parents can really find success in this, and it really just helps them be more aware of how they are in relationship with their children, how their relationships with their own caregivers are impacting their interactions with their children. And so it's I've just seen a lot of parents do some really good work and kind of heal some of their own, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but things that they carry over from childhood and kind of have a different pattern with their children. It's really cool when foster parents and the birth parent can both be learning the model kind of at the same time, especially if it's at a transition point for a child, because it really helps support the child in that transition, and knowing that all of their caregivers are a safe haven or a secure base for them, and can meet their needs, and that it gives the parent, the foster parent and the bio parent, a common language to use too. So that's kind of like the best way to use it, I think, but that I don't know how often that actually happens in practice.
Yeah. Yeah. For those who aren't as familiar, one thing that I appreciate, so it's like a reflective approach, right? It's not like teaching, it's teaching, but it's teaching through your own experience and like what your desire is for your kid. But the other cool thing, or something that I appreciate about it is like oftentimes I feel like in Minnesota, some of our interventions feel like they have to go through a medical model, or you have to be like a mental health practitioner, or there's these like stats of like something that has to happen. And with Circle of Security, like facilitators can be anybody. Right. And so this could be, something that you train resource parents in or birth parents in to then support and become the facilitator for the group. I'll just share one of their little images. Because you mentioned the shark music, Julie. Can you see the slide? I don't know what you can see, but can you see the bean with? So their little mantra is always be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind, and whenever possible, follow the lead, but when necessary, take charge. And so I think that can be kind of like this nice, clear, like, okay, like, what am I doing in that, versus to your point, like, I forgot step 2. Oh my gosh, I forgot step 4 in the magic. Like, what next? So yeah, what a great example. Thanks, Julie. Other folks who you feel like your agency has practices that lend themselves to attachment.
So I just want to piggyback off of Julie. Like, we don't have that what you're talking about, the circle of security, but we do have something called builders, where they go in once a child is ready to transition into the home, where they go in and assist the parent in rebuilding that attachment. I don't think it's not as depth as addressing the parents' trauma, because we do refer parents out, and hopefully that gets addressed when they are in therapy or counseling or whatever. But I don't think they go into in depth with the parents' trauma, to where they can identify their trauma and what triggers them, to where they are more capable of parenting their child. I think that's the piece that's missing, and maybe we need to like look into adding that to our system in Louisiana. But I think with Louisiana, the flexibility in the increase of visits, that's very helpful, because we do have a policy that says the minimal, but I think workers have really taken advantage of increasing visits, especially when the children are younger, and we know there's a high likelihood that they will go back home. So I like that we have the flexibility to either have the foster parent, the worker, somebody supervise visits longer when we're starting to get into that transition of the children going home. So and also slow transitions. We need to assess more when we are transitioning our children into a home, and to make sure that it's slow, planned out, and we're able to make sure that the child is maintained in the home instead of transitioning them quickly and then it falls apart. So in Louisiana, we're looking more at have been doing and looking more at doing slow transitions more often than not.
Mhm. And what I'm hearing you say is, like, if you are coupling a slow transition with increased relationship time throughout, that is going to feel different and probably land different than if there was like slow transition. Okay, now here you are, or quick transition, here you are, right? Like setting everyone up for a little bit more success, and strengthening potentially that relationship between parent and resource parent.
Yes, yes. And with the
So that
child, with them, not being in the home for so long, strengthening that bond with with the parent.
Yeah. Other folks?
I can talk a little bit about Florida and what we do here on the Treasure Coast. We have what we call an MDT in the first 72 hours after a removal. We get all parties together, which include the birth parents, the resource parents, and even the children if they're age appropriate. We also do.
What does it stand for? Your meeting acronym?
It's a multidisciplinary team meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But we basically get everybody together. Prior to that, actually, we also do an icebreaker call. So the resource parent is able to have a call with their child, or the birth parent is able to have a call with their child. And then we do the MDT where everybody can meet and talk, make sure the child has their needs taken care of. And really starting from that point on, we continue that process to make sure that everyone's on the same page, that the children have the ability to have their parents, their bio parents at activities, whether it's sports or medical appointments or anything like that, really trying to get them to be engaged from the beginning. We also do, let's see, transition planning. So when it is time for reunification, we do talk well in advance about what that transition will look like. And we all come together again to discuss that transition, as far as how long the children are going to need in order to continue that transition and attachment. And then one thing I wanted to share, if you're okay with me sharing my screen, is we did a June reunification month calendar. And this was just something, let me see if I can share it, that we did just to acknowledge everybody involved in our system. And we did this as leadership and other people involved in, I don't know if you guys can see that. Can you see our little calendar here? me get out of this. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we did, and this, again, this was June, it was reunification month here. So we just had a different day for different things. So you can see, you know, we're having the parents engage with their children. We're having case managers engaging with foster parents. We're having leadership engaging with case managers, as well as foster parents engaging with case managers, just trying to give those words of encouragement and trying to push people going in the right direction. Let's see, even to our teens, they may not even be at the point of reunification yet, but just reaching out to them and complimenting them on little things, and having the parents do that as well, and kind of building that engagement between bio parents, foster parents, and the system.
Allison, would you be willing to share that as a resource to the group? Like you could, if you are, like you could email it to me and I can pass it out, or we can put it in as a link in the chat.
Absolutely. And I know Jara Westkoff was on the panel, was it maybe 2 weeks ago? And she's with CC Kids. So she is one of our champions here in Florida. So this was something that she helped develop for us as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
We're trying to get on the right page. I know attachment for me, especially with watching the presentation, I didn't realize attachment at such a young age, you know, with the infants, that they look at them as a caregiver, not necessarily as a parent. So really understanding that process and working maybe a little faster when they're infants before they get to that 7-month point is important too.
Yeah. Or even maybe providing a little awareness to help parents think about, right? Like this resource parent isn't taking your space. Like you are a parent, they're just caring for and attending to like the immediate needs that no one else can do in the moment, because like they're there all the time, you know, like kind of giving a little space for the tenderness that happens, because I wouldn't, yeah, I mean, I don't know, I think that can be helpful too.
Absolutely.
Or, you know, like, yeah, we feel that bond to our kids, but you know, in the presentation, it's like, well, at 2 months, they're just looking for like, who's helping me out, right? You know, and yes, there is preference because of like how mom smells or, you know, various things. But at the end of the day, the kid at that stage is just like, I gotta survive. I need food, I need comfort, I need regulation. So yeah. Anyone else want to share something that you feel like your agency does that aligns with attachment?
Well, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Ada.
Okay, I'm sorry if I go out. I'm driving, so the internet connection has been sucky. So we have a new program with Connections to Independence. It's called Circle of Support. We work with youth 14 and older, so we help them transition into being independent, healthy, independent adults. So what I know about Circle of Support, we basically help our youth find people around them that will be supported once they reach of age. So they're not always, because a lot of our youth depend on C2I, including me. I'm one of the youth that that depended on C2I once because we don't have nobody else, you know, us foster kids don't have nobody else. So they're trying to help us find healthy relationships in the people, if it's a foster parent, if it's our biological family, if it's people, unpaid people. They want to help us find unpaid people to be a part of our lives as we get older, as they get older, I should say. I always say we, I'm sorry. So basically, yeah, I don't know. I guess that explaining it kind of. I got a lot.
Yeah, no, Ada, that was the thing that I was thinking about that I know your agency is doing, that lends itself to like, what does attachment and look like as we get older, right? Because it's not just a little kid thing and then we're done. Like we all still have attachment to folks, right? You know, think about, you know, something goes wrong in your day, who do you call? or who do you seek out, you know?
Yeah, we got to find unpaid people, and we're trying to teach the youth how to have healthy relationships, because as we get older, because we still, all the trauma from past foster care still shows up, you know. And then, okay, they had all these paid people, all the foster parents, and you know, some people, well, I guess we don't really work with youth that was adopted out, but some people, you know, their biological family. A lot of them, once they turn 18, they would like to get reconnected with their biological family. So we try and work on that relationship while you're still of age. So once you age out, you have that person.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Ada. All right. Anyone else who feels called to share a practice before we kind of look at our next topic area?
I can share. Oh, who is that? You can go.
You're good. Go ahead. Yeah, you go.
I'll be real quick. So in Hennepin County, as the beginning of this year, we created the placement support team, and it's a team of workers who support initial placements for the first 30 days to ensure that until, especially for our relative and kin placements, but any placement, but that while licensing is getting done, that people have everything that they need to meet the child's needs, and that we get comfort items from the home and bring them back. So this team is also implementing the QPI practices of the comfort call and the icebreaker meeting. So one thing that we've just started to implement is that we're coupling that first initial family visit with the icebreaker meeting, since everybody are together anyway, and hoping that they can be in person. And that's where the data shows that the sooner that there is that first family visit and connection, the more likely reunification.
Mhm.
Basically,
Thanks, Eda.
I was gonna talk about like the transition periods, and then also, I'm not sure if we're doing what Suzanne said, but I know that we do have a visit within that first 72 hours. So court and then visit. So I think as a resource parent or as a foster parent, I try my best to make it known to the family that we're not here to take your child. We want to work with you. We're a team. You can do it. You know, we're going to do this together. Sometimes it works out. I mean, most of you probably know this. Sometimes it works really well. Sometimes the parent doesn't want any, you know, sometimes they like you, sometimes they don't. But I just think with our kids, not only do we have to be consistent with them, but being consistent with our families. Even if they cuss me out, I'm going to be at the next visit, say hello, you know, and just allowing them that space with their child. And that's something that I've kind of learned, allowing them that space where they can change their child's diaper or they can take their child to the bathroom. I don't have to stay the whole, I actually normally don't stay unless it's a small baby. I normally kind of give the parent, and they have their worker there, kind of the space to just be there with their child. And so I think transition periods, and then the comfort calls, and then that first initial kind of meeting with them is something that our agency does really well and that they encourage. So yeah,
Mhm.
basically what everyone else said.
But it does help though validate, like, okay, this is a thing. If all these folks are doing it and they're all finding like some success in it, like maybe this is something we should be doing. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, where is my, hold on, I gotta find my PowerPoint slide again.
While you're doing that, Kate, can I just say, Brooke,
Yeah.
I just find that so hopeful. You're just an inspiration, because there's not a lot of providers who are, and like, they'll implement the practices, but you're kind of going all in. And sometimes in our county, we're getting some pushback because this is new as well, especially for very seasoned foster providers who are like, I know what I'm doing. I don't need you guys calling. You know, I know how to take care of kids and all that kind of stuff. So thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and hopefully, Suzanne, this conversation allows you to be able to both honor what they're saying of like, yeah, you do know how to take care of children. And we know that this child needs relationship with their parent, and we see you as being that vehicle to support that, right? Like it allows it to be a little bit of like, you're not a deficit. We just are looking for an enhancement for from the kid's perspective.
Oh, absolutely. I just think as it's a worker that's involved helping to facilitate that, I think there's like, you know, maybe we don't need another worker involved, and which there's a lot of times that we are saying, okay, yes, we just need to know that it's happened so we can ensure it and document it. We don't need to be in every little nitty gritty activity, but we just want to make sure that connection is made so that when we're established for the co-parenting model, so that when we are out after 30 days, that, you know, other workers or programs or whatever can't disrupt that's like a solid connection as they move forward.
I just want to say too, something that I've noticed, you do have to be able to speak up for yourself. I find a lot of times foster families, they become extremely frustrated because they feel like my schedule isn't being, you know, I'm trying to work with the family, but my schedule isn't being respected and I'm not being respected. But the truth is we have to speak up for ourselves. Like if this doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for me. We need to pick a different day. And so sometimes I think with foster families, they are afraid to say, this doesn't work for me. But then they become so frustrated because they're not using their voice to share how they're feeling. So, and of course that comes with trust. Do you trust your worker? Do you trust that your worker has your best interests at heart as well as your child's or whatever? So for DCFS to kind of allow us to be more involved on our own time, we also have to be willing to speak up. And if it doesn't work for us, it doesn't work for us. Pick a different day. It's, you know, it's called a relationship. And I think we forget about that. We can have these relationships with their families and say, that doesn't work for me. Let's pick a different day. Let's do it differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Voicing your needs so that they can get met. Yeah. Good point. Okay. So the other discussion we were hoping to have today is like, what practices do you have that interferes with attachment? And how do you know? Like what's tripping up or getting in the way of being able to support the attachment experience for kids?
For us, the first thing that popped into my mind is that, you know, in Hennepin County, we I think 70% of our kids go to a placement with a relative or kin. And there are times when they're first placed with a non-relative and then a relative is identified and they're moved to the relative, which is a good thing, but is also interfering with or disrupting that initial attachment. So I would just say disruptions or moves, whether it's for a good reason or a bad reason, can interfere with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Or even maybe how, even if the move has to happen, how are we doing it through the lens of what is this child needing, right? Like your 12-month-old, great that there is, you know, maybe like a family that is going to be able to support them that's kin. And you don't just pick up a 12-month-old who's been in a foster home and go, oh, now here's your new home, right? Like that relationship has to build. Because otherwise we're creating a rupture in a really important relationship. Yeah. Other practices that create the hiccup or more than a hiccup and interferes with attachment?
I would just add, placement changes in general, especially for our older children. If there's a disruption, they're asked to move immediately. Or sometimes they're looking for an additional placement. They find a placement, but they're not willing to hold the bed open for a while for a transition to naturally occur. So they just move the child the next day to that new placement. I think that definitely interferes with attachments, not only for the caregivers, but also for their schools and friends and any other attachments that they've been able to build while being in that additional home.
That's a really good point.
Mhm.
I think as a foster parent, if I've worked really, really hard, I can think of one particular child. If I've worked really, really hard to get them the resources that they need, and then they're moved for whatever reason, and then that's not continued at the next home. In this particular case, it was for siblings to be together, but basically all the work we had done, no one kind of checked up on that. And then it was just, I feel like it hinders the success that the child's going to have, especially if they've struggled with maybe not attending school at all. With that, yeah, and then also transitions in general. And I completely forgot what you said, Allison, but I meant to, do you mind going back
I
and
was struck
saying
by
what you had said
bed
originally?
bed holds was what I was like thinking about when
Okay,
There's no bed holds. I mean, do you understand what that is? I know that we probably all say or call things a little differently. But here, we don't get bed holds very often because, that is a paid placement while the bed hold is there, and they don't want to double pay the current placement as well as the next placement. So even if we had some grace with our providers and our placement providers to be able to give us that, maybe the interview, I know we have some placements that do an interview first where they at least get to meet them, talk to them and do those things, and then set up a time for an actual admittance is good. I'm thinking especially for our older teens, because I feel like they move the most in our system of care. And I think that for them, they're kind of losing all of those attachments too, especially at an age where they really need to be attaching to somebody to get them through, puberty and all of those things. So especially with our teens, but I've seen it happen numerous times where, they're disrupting, maybe somebody's given a 30-day notice, maybe they haven't even given a 30-day notice, and we have to pick up and move them, sometimes without them even knowing. I mean, we try to at least call them the night before, but then there are some people that say, please don't tell them, because then they're gonna act out and be disruptive overnight. And it's just very difficult for me to kind of chew that one, to make sure that these kids understand where they're going, especially at an age where they are vulnerable and they know that we could have those conversations with them so that they could understand what's happening.
and since you were talking about that, it kind of jogged my memory, but when we are receiving a placement, especially if it's been a disruption, for me, I want to know all the details. Like if a worker calls and they leave everything out and they don't tell me any behaviors, nothing. And that has happened before. And so I make it a point to ask, okay, why are they being moved? Would you allow, or can I contact the previous foster family? And actually what we've been doing is, if there is a disruption, everyone comes together and we talk about, we have the current foster family, maybe that's asking for removal, and then the possible foster family, and we talk about it. And I think it takes away, I call it kind of like demonizing, like when you think of the previous foster family and you're like, oh, they didn't know what they were doing, or this child's great. And then, you have them for 3 weeks and they start hitting and biting you and you're like, well, maybe there was a reason, So I think this call allows you to be honest with everyone. And then also the future foster family to say, okay, this is what we're looking at. And yes, we feel like we can do this. So I think just making sure when when there's a disruption, that for the future placement, that foster family has all of the information that they need, and then they're willing to say yes or no, whatever. But
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Communication is so important. And I feel like sometimes we walk on eggshells because we want somebody to accept our children. But I think that transparency is 100% important, because if they know what they're getting themselves into, we don't have to worry about maybe an additional disruption that's going to happen for our child. So I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. And just that is such a great like advocacy for why initial or comfort calls are important to do at all transitions, not just that initial one into placement. So, Kina, I felt like you maybe went off mute, but maybe Brooke and Allison's conversation kind of hit your high points.
It did, because with the transition thing, I see it happen a lot with the younger kids. Foster parents are actually asked for a transition from one foster parent to another when it's the younger kids. But with our teenagers, they just like, look, you need to get them out immediately. And I'm like, tell me something positive about this child. Tell me something that I can take back to the other foster parent, or would you like to talk to the foster parent so you can explain what's going on and why you asked for the child's removal? So yeah, that really hit home for me, because I do placement calls 3 days a week, and most of my placement calls are disruptions with teenagers, and most of the time they want them out immediately and don't want to do a transition. So yeah, I think it's really important, even if it's a young child or even an older child, that we try to get the potential foster parent and the worker and the foster parent that's currently caring for the child together to discuss this child and what could possibly work best for the older teen in their home.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if we circle back, I mean, so part of it also, I think, is like, as grownups, we get uncomfortable in hard conversations. And so it is easier to say, you take care of that, because you don't then have to like be with that child or that teenager and say, this isn't working for me. And I want to support you and I'm not able to. We have to go somewhere else. To a child or a youth who's going to be able to be like, WTF? Like, I thought you were gonna, you know what I mean? Like, the relationship is gonna look different in the like tension place of that than if it's like a 2-year-old. And so I think I don't know, like as you were talking, Kina, I'm like, oh, that like what's going on for us? Like what's inside of us and how do we help support that? Or, Julie, as you were saying, like, do we go mean, weak, or gone? That's also what's happening too for some of our resource parents, is not being able to stay in that wiser, kinder, bigger, stronger space, but like, or like,
Right.
nope, absolutely not,
And I think
so.
we tend to forget what we done as teenagers. Like, we can't forget that most of the time we did the same thing. So how your parents didn't give up on you when you were texting a boy about sex, or talking about sex, or maybe smoking on the weekends. Like, we forget that we were teenagers as one, and how did our parents work through that? But I think it's just easier, instead of addressing the issue within, it's just easier to ask for that removal then, instead of trying to work with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Curious question for St. Louis County. Are your staff trained in like, did your staff experience circle of security? Or
Some
is it
have.
only,
So like Julie and I are each trained in circle of security. And so I did it originally with like families, so bio families, and then I've done it with foster families as well. But we have like, so we have IFBS, which is intensive family-based services. We have 2 workers north, 2 workers south. And so they're trained in circles and security. And so they do most of our individual or groups with our bio families that we work with. So some staff have been trained. Some have gone through the full 8 weeks of training. Some have just get like a quick overview. And we still have to get others updated on it too. But
yeah, just curious about that, right? Because even thinking about how do we be reflective in relationship. It just made me think of that. And I really like circular security.
I do too. That was one thing that really stood out. I was glad he kind of hooked that into the training last week, because then it got me thinking of, oh, what do we need to improve on when we talk about circular security and that attachment piece?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts about things that interfere in attachment? through
I
our
was going to
practices?
say the us versus them that we experience with parents quite often. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a practice, but I know we have parents that we
Not a
work
written
with.
practice.
Not a written one, yes. But I definitely see it at times in certain situations where parents are very much like not open to learning anything from the foster parents, don't believe what the foster parents tell them about the child. I have a really big case that I'm dealing with that on right now. And so it's really hard to break that, because we all know that kids pick up on those senses when they go to visits or doctor's appointments and stuff. So I noticed that quite a bit, that interferes with that attachment.
Yeah. I also really appreciate, because we do have practices that are not, we have unspoken practices. And so I'm glad that you brought that into the room.
Just to kind of go along with that, saying that kids kind of pick up on that. If a child ever tells me they're going to tell their mama on me, I always say, that sounds so good. I'm going to tell your mama too, because me and your mom don't have any secrets. We tell each other everything. And then they're like, no, don't tell my mom I wasn't listening. And I was like, well, we don't have secrets, so we're going to talk about it. So I think just going in and also the child knowing, hey, they really are a team. Maybe they don't know each other that well yet, or maybe they don't even really, get along all the time, but they really are a team. And then also for me being willing to do that with a parent, talk to them about things and not try to be like secretive or, sometimes I think it is like that, us versus them. We're not going to tell your mom this, or your mom feels this way, or your dad feels this way. So yeah, I had a child tell me that, a new placement tell me that the other day, and it was so funny to me. It was so funny. But yes, just letting them know we're a team, we're working together. Everybody's working together. Your worker's here for you. I'm here for you. Your parents are here for you. So yeah.
I think one of the things that can interfere with attachment happens with licensing. And so I'm thinking specifically of like relative placements where maybe a child is placed in a relative home and licensing gets in there, and it's, through the process, we find this person, for whatever reason, is not licensable. They don't meet the requirements. And then a decision has to be made as to, whether or not that child should remain in that home. Meanwhile, they've been with grandma for 3 months. Well, this process has been, or sometimes longer too, if we have to involve DHS, and then DHS makes the ultimate decision that we can't issue a license. And that can be really hard. And sometimes I think it's kind of twofold, where maybe we have what looks like a good relative placement and it makes sense, and it's just a licensing barrier. I had a grandparent who, she had four of her grandchildren, and it was a culturally appropriate placement, and she was grandma and kind of the biggest support that these children had, but grandma just would, for whatever reason, wasn't completing licensing paperwork. And so administration was telling me as the licensor, hey, we can't keep these kids there. She's not doing licensing. And I'm like, hey, grandma's taking excellent care of these children. And what's it going to do to move these children? And by the way, we don't have a home that can take 4 children together, 2 of who had special needs. And we don't have any culturally appropriate homes for these children. They're Native American. I'm not willing to do that to these kids. And so there was kind of a, they ultimately ended up reunifying and we didn't finish licensing, but sometimes kids get placed into homes without a quick consultation with licensing, and there's major safety concerns. And things that are bigger issues where they should never have been placed in the home to begin with. So that's something that's coming up quite a lot in our agency. But it's really tricky because sometimes grandma or auntie is the only other person that this child has a significant relationship with, and it just doesn't fit with our system and rules. And, it's just kind of a thing that is really difficult to work around when we have, people that are saying, well, what's best for the kids? Well, yeah, that's really important, but we have to think about what's best. And by the way, we have to think about Title 4E funding. And if we don't get these people licensed in a timely manner, we lose 4E funding. And, there's all of that. And I just think the people who always end up losing are the kids. And so I don't know what can be done about that, but that like, from where I sit, that's one of the biggest worries that I have right now.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up.
I totally agree with that, because we see that happen all the time. And now there's a big push for our relative caregivers to get certified so they can potentially adopt if the children go up for adoption. So we're not even like considering custody anymore. So that just wipes out a lot of our caregivers that have been caring for the child even before they entered care. They were caring for them without anything. And now that they're in care, we're telling them, well, you can't have your grandchild or niece, nephew, or whatever, because you don't meet agency requirements. And I think that's just such a disservice to the family. It really is. That's a great point, Julie. It really is. That's a great point.
That actually happened to us. We were going to be their placement, and we did several transition periods, and the overnight visit was pretty traumatizing for them. One in particular was so upset they used the restroom on themselves, and that night they just screamed. And I said, you know what, we're not doing this to them, so they're gonna have to figure something else out. So I called the family member. It was like 10 o'clock at night. I called the family member and I was like, they're crying, they're screaming, this is traumatic for them, I am bringing them to you right now. And I texted the worker, whatever. So when we had the call, my husband told them, he was like, either you guys need to leave them where they're at, or y'all need to figure out how they can be reunified, because this is traumatic for them. They've been living in this placement for, I think it was a year, to be honest. It was a long period of time. And basically it just didn't meet, the standard where they were. So, and you know what? Not that long after, I think it was a couple weeks later, they were reunified with their family, with their parents. So I just think I don't know. That was the one case that I had with that. And I guess we could have been selfish because the children were beautiful, and, we could have said, they need to be with us, or this is good, but it just wasn't good. And it was traumatic for me too. I was so upset, because there's a difference when a child has been neglected and they have been living in an environment that hasn't been safe and hasn't been healthy, and children that have been nurtured and taken care of and loved. There's a difference. A lot of my kids just come in and they're happy to be in my house and they go right to sleep, but if a child has been loved and taken care of and nurtured, and they have a hard time. So that's what happened with that. But yeah, great point, Julie. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all for the discussion, and just trying to think about what is this? What do we continue to lift up or get curious about, of hey, I heard that they're doing this. How can we add this in? And what is it that is hard that we still need to strive to make changes for? As you were talking about the bed hold thing, Allison, I was thinking about if we could just get past the like immediate, you have a double payment happening and get to the bigger picture and what this means for us as like a larger, longer system and not looking at the today money, that will be worth it. Right? Because that child, if we can wrap around them now, will not have to use the emergency rooms when they're teenagers and will not have to use incarceration or, like I'm going like big dramatic, right? But, like, okay, wasn't that $400 worth it? So.
Absolutely. I think one of the other barriers though is also the amount of teens that need homes. So even if you hold that bed for one to get the other one in, you're still taking that bed away from somebody else. So I mean, it is a much bigger problem probably. But I like what you're saying because in the long run, yes. I mean, if we can get them in there and transition them, build those attachments the way that they need to be built, if they're able to understand those clear expectations before they get dropped off at a new group home, maybe they wouldn't disrupt. Maybe they would be able to stay there and get right on the right track again and build those attachments and eventually be adopted or reunified or whatever that may look like for our teens.
Yeah. So, as we sort of wind down our time today, I just want to highlight, we've got small group discussions next week. If you are from Minnesota, Florida, or Kansas, it'll be on Tuesday at 9. And our Louisiana folks will be on Wednesday, the 28th. Michelle and Julie, I will see you both in person in St. Louis County after the training part is done, but Jamie will be teaching you all the lovely wise things that she's coming forward to support in that. And then our next group training is on October 11th. And so we will see each other then. I did add, and I believe everyone on this, we've done our one-to-ones, but I did add some more times in October. So if something comes up and you are just interested in like, even if it's an extra 5 or something, right? Like, feel free to look at that Calendly schedule. And we can always connect and work that out. If after our conversation today, you wanted to like provide any of the resources, I know, Allison, you're going to send over the reunification month calendar, but if there's anything that you want this team to have I can collect it and then send it out in a recap, and I can send out some Circle of Security information in a recap too, because it is it's good. So yeah, so as we are winding down, I would love to offer the floor for any last minute thoughts that you feel like need to be entered into this space, and what would be your emotion word now, and has it changed since when we first started? I can start out. I have nothing else to add, but my emotion word would be settled. Julie.
I don't have anything else to add either. I don't know. My emotion is a little more hopeful. Erica.
I really don't have anything else to add. I've been absorbing everything. Is it possible to be more intrigued than I was when I started? I haven't heard of Circles of Security before, and I'm really interested. And that sounds like a really good program. Brooke.
Well, I am feeling inspired by all of you, and I think I'm just reminded that all of us are here to do hard work, and we want to do the best that we can. And so all of you have inspired me. So yeah.
You want to pass it along to someone?
Yeah, Allison.
I don't have anything else to add, and I will be with Julie. I'm still hopeful, as I had from when we started today, but hopeful is a good emotion for me. And I'll drop it over to Michelle.
I too have nothing else to add. I'm going to stick with curious still, but also add excited. Let's go with Kina.
I don't have anything to add, but I'm gonna keep excited. I'm gonna drop nervous. It wasn't anything to do with QPI. It's still something to do with something else. But I want to piggyback off of Brooke and said inspired as well, because with talking to you guys, I can see there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that we're not the only ones going through these things. Is other people in other states also having the same thing, and we're coming together and talking about it to find a way to hopefully one day solve the issue. So yeah, I'm inspired and excited. Miss,
You cut out. Did you say Suzanne?
yes.
Yeah, okay, great. I don't have anything else to add either. I guess the word after hearing from everybody would be, I guess it's 2 words. I would just say continuous improvement, like there's always room to learn and grow. And so inspired by that. Who has not gone?
I think that's all of us.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Well, I look forward to our continued exploration together and see where we go. So yeah, again, though, please reach out if you are needing any additional support or want connection. And then if you have resources you're willing to share, pass them along, and I will make sure that they get out to our folks who are here and those who weren't able to join today. So, and then have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, whatever you end up doing with it. So see you next week.